Take this across to our other guests who are with us. With us, we have Dr. Ashok Seth, chairman of Fortis Escorts Heart Institute. Dr. Sunila Garg is member of the Lancet Commission, also of the COVID India Task Force. Professor Dr. S.K. Sareen is the Vice Chancellor of the ILBS Hospital, and he's also a member of the National Task Force on COVID that was constituted by the SC. Also, Rajiv Dasgupta, member of the National Task Force, is with us. Let me begin with you first, Dr. Sunila Garg, and let me begin by asking you very, very important choices that have to be made in a country like ours, where over 50% of the population, eligible population, has yet not received both doses of the vaccine. At a time like this, should the priority of the vaccine, particularly the booster dose, be prioritized for healthcare workers, because clearly the fact that patient zero appears to be a healthcare worker at this point of time, and also the fact that several of those who are immunocompromised, like the elderly or the other vulnerable groups, do you think at least for them booster dose is now something that is perhaps overdue?
Mr. Balakrishnan, this is an important question. What I have to say at this point of time, that as of now we have got a journey of about 62 crore doses. That means about 83% of our eligible population has received one dose, and as you mentioned that really 49.5% have received the second dose. So what is important at this point of time is that to expedite our vaccination pace and to give everybody 2 doses of vaccine. That is important because vaccines are still preventing against, the moderate infections, the hospitalization and even mortality as well. So that should be our priority. Having said so, then, it will be our question, basically whether we look at the elderly populations or people who are immunocompromised to take up the issue of booster doses, because it is not a question of one booster. You see, as and when the variants will come, we will talk about these issues. So this becomes important at this juncture that we vaccinate our total eligible population, and then we think about the vulnerable population. But then this is an issue of under consideration, which will be discussed shortly also.
Absolutely. Let me get in Dr. Ashok Seth on that. Dr. Seth, do you think there is enough scientific data? We know the Lancet study is out. It's spoken about 6 vaccines where the booster dose, even mixed use, they say, perhaps could be beneficial. But having said that, when the government takes a decision like this, it has to be sure that it is 100%. Do you think the government taking time in that light is a positive sign that they want to get it right? They don't want to take any risks at all because they want the Indian data also to back up these claims as far as safety, if not efficacy, are concerned?
Let me be not beating around the bush and be very specific. I trust my government and I trust the government experts. At this stage, the data which has been shown in the Lancet is right. You give a booster, you have 6 times, and much of those vaccines are not available in India. Let's just stick to Covishield, which was tested with a booster. And that does show that 3 to 5 times increase in antibodies. Now, I must say that the roadmap has to be restructured now. This is the time when variant and vicious variants could be around the corner, that we need to recreate the roadmap, and it's a fresh roadmap. And let me just specifically pin out what I believe is what the experts who guide the government should be looking at. Firstly, priority being, we need to double vaccinate. 85% of the population is single vaccinated. Double vaccination, what is happening is a second dose hesitancy. That can be overcome clearly by decreasing the duration of Covishield from 3 months to being earlier on, which is well proven and which is recognized in every country which uses Covishield. And this is the time to consider that and introduce that. That will decrease the second dose hesitancy, which is creating a big roadblock. Secondly, very importantly, I would say that for the larger population, it's a very fine tuning. It's the issue between availability, scientific data and efficacy, and practically the vaccine equity. That has to be looked at very carefully, and I trust the government to decide the right point. But clearly, time is now for what we call an additional dose. Remember, booster is a different issue, but those who are immunocompromised, those who got transplant, those who've actually immunosuppressed in any way, haven't even got their benefits from the first 2 doses. They cannot be excluded into a booster. They should have their 3rd or what we call an additional dose. And finally, this is the time to reconsider in the roadmap clearly for the healthcare workers, for the frontline workers, for the elderly, an urgent roadmap to say 8 to 10 months have gone by, the immunity would be waning.
Okay.
Isn't it time to increase that immunity by a booster? So this is the roadmap which has to be clearly outlined, because we know the availability of our second doses.
Very important.
We know the availability of the population anyway.
That's very important. That's a very important point, Doctor. In fact, we had, government doctors also come out, and those from Entagi have actually delineated these two categories, as you very rightly mentioned, of additional dose and booster dose. But I want to bring in Dr. Sareen on that note. And Dr. Sareen, the question that I want to pose to you is this: I don't think there's any debate at all as far as the requirement of healthcare workers and additional doses are concerned. And I think this latest variant and the very fact that it has impacted already a doctor, now whether the doctor was immunocompromised or had low antibodies is another debate, but the requirement of the additional dose for our healthcare workers is beyond question. My question to you, sir, is at a time when we are still continuing, international flights, we are continuing domestic flights. There are several of those at our airports and other locations who perhaps, in a sense, are performing very important duties. Is it important to bring in those people as well into this category of people, along with, of course, the elderly and the immunocompromised, into this category of those who require these additional doses, because this will only help all of us and cut the chain, perhaps, as far as spread of Omicron variant is concerned?
Madhav, you're absolutely right. These are frontline workers and they must be protected to the best. Of course, they would be using their masks. I have to add two things to what other colleagues have said. Booster means everybody has good immunity, then you boost. But our vaccines, or any vaccine, gives you, even with 2 shots, maybe 70% efficacy, 30% may not form antibodies. We must remember, therefore, we are vulnerable. So we should, while vaccinate all of the population with 2 dosages as fast as we can, but we also must know the limitations of current vaccines. Therefore, if we have enough vaccine, undoubtedly we should give a booster. Third thing, when you take the 3rd dose or a booster dose, it will still require 4 weeks to 6 weeks to get enough antibodies. With Pfizer, it takes about 11 days to get antibody levels 10 times. We do not know how much time it will take with our 3rd shot to make good antibodies. Therefore, we should be prepared. My strong recommendation, and I agree, if the National Task Force on the vaccination agrees, we should have, and if we have vaccines, we should use frontline workers, doctors, healthcare workers, and people above 40 or those with comorbidities to get a booster dose.
All right, I want to bring in... Yeah.
Still one point.
Okay, make a point, please, go ahead.
2 dosages, still Delta came and infected those who had got two boosters. So despite all this, then Omicron, which has very high transmissibility, it's an entirely new virus in a way, it can still infect despite. But there are 2 layers and we should protect ourselves with that.
Absolutely. Dr. Rajiv Dasgupta, the question that I want to ask you, and a lot of people are very curious about this, you would have seen the news reports as well, if a doctor, whether or not the person had lower level of antibodies is another subject of debate, as I mentioned earlier, but the fact is that he would have been infected by Omicron through somebody else. Who is that somebody at this point of time? We still don't know, sir. And that's going to be something that we really need to answer the earliest. We do know that over 200 other contacts have been isolated, but yet the source of Omicron is not known. And that's certainly something that, we would look at getting an answer for at the very earliest.
Thank you. Those of us who deal with real world, what's called shoe leather epidemiology, we know that real world epidemiology is messy. The point is not really who he got it from, but the fact that he didn't have travel history, and we are assuming that this is very early days of Omicron in India. It simply means that the infection has come into the country, at least in Bangalore, below the radar. And in the initial phases, right through, India was never categorized as one of community transmission. But obviously, it is there in the community, and that's where he's got it from. So what we interpret out of this is more important than who exactly he got it from. That to me is the real interpretation. And therefore, getting on to the larger question, the key evidence emerging from South Africa, 2 or 3, one, that infections have risen very rapidly. 2, that prior infection with Delta is not protective necessarily. 3, there's at least one patient in the US who not only had 2 doses, but also had a booster dose. But at the same time, as all the panelists are saying, that 2 doses will certainly, or at least as the current evidence goes, certainly protects against severe disease, hospitalization, etc.
Okay, very, very important points that you made over there. I want to bring in Dr. Seth on another important point. Dr. Seth.
And one final point,
Yeah.
quickly, one final point.
Okay.
Also, very early evidence from Africa, South Africa, particularly Gauteng province, that there is an increase in hospitalization among children and toddlers. Now, that in a sense is to be expected because they're not yet vaccinated. In fact, the average of South Africa is about 26%, and the average of the entire Africa continent is about 7%. That's how crucial vaccine inequity is, and that's what the state of at least some parts of the world is.
But that's a very, very perplexing problem, if I can take that to Dr. Seth, because if indeed toddlers and children are getting it, and you know what we are told are, at the moment, there are different views, of course. Vaccines for children are yet not there here in India at the moment. They are in the pipeline, is what we've been told for many weeks now, Dr. Seth. But there's also another view that children below the age of maybe 5 or 6 already have a lot of vaccines that they are administered and already would have a higher sense of immunity. There's that view as well. So where should they stand? Because this is something that would be a huge amount of concern for those who have toddlers or small children.
Let me just firstly allay the anxieties of a lot of parents who've heard this about a lot of children get it admitted in South Africa. That's correct. But what we still don't know is whether they have severe infection or whether they're admitted. So that's the first point. We still don't know about Omicron. But still, I think it's time that we actually did, again, like I said, emphasis, and I think it's probably around the corner, of vaccinating children. But more importantly, at that time, when we talk about these young children, is the fact that are the adults fully vaccinated? Because those toddlers and those children are not getting it from outside. It is the parents who are giving it to them. When we worry about the more children between 12 and 18, they're the ones who are going out, mixing with friends, mixing in the school, and those are the ones who bring it back to them. It's not the toddlers. So that is why I think there's a fine balance in making sure that there's safety. And when you vaccinate children who actually have usually mild illnesses and are getting it from their parents versus the side effects of the vaccine, and that's where our experts are looking at it critically, but I'm sure they're going to come out with this very important group that we have to vaccinate. That's the important aspect of it.
Absolutely. Dr. Sunila Garg, I also want to ask you another important aspect. I know this particular study doesn't touch upon it, but we have seen statements come in from Moderna and other companies. Zycovid-D is another one that we've heard statements about. All of these companies are focusing on updating their vaccines. Now, is that going to be something in the wake of Omicron that we would be seeing on all vaccines? Do you think that that is going to be required, for instance, for Covishield and Covaxin, which are the most widely used in India?
Definitely, you see, when the virus is going to mutate over a period of time, we need to have a relook at the vaccines also, because we must remember that whatever the vaccines were made, they were against the original Wuhan strain. So like we have come out with the flu vaccine also, and every time WHO updates us against the strains for which the vaccine has got to be used, so that is important part. So we need to relook at the vaccine, that is important. And as of now, you see, we say that the 2 doses are effective. That is the message from this platform. And everybody who has not started the vaccination should come for the vaccine. And who have not taken the second dose must go ahead with the second dose of vaccine. So, and Covishield and Covaxin are the vaccines which are being used in India. And these are fairly effective for preventing against moderate to severe infections, and they prevent deaths also.
Let me get a word from Professor Dasgupta on that. Professor Dasgupta, are we looking at an early updation of this? In fact, we've heard at least one company say that by early next year, we could be seeing a fresh vaccine come in on the basis of Omicron. Are we looking at a similar timeline, or perhaps in a few weeks or months later to that, for a vaccine updation here in India? What is the realistic picture on ground, sir?
Well, there are 3 elements to look at. One, what's being studied in the laboratory, which virologists are doing, vaccinologists are doing. those who develop the vaccine, those who will study this. The second, that the companies will then need to modify the vaccine, and which, as Professor Garg said, is very well known with adult influenza or influenza-like disease vaccines. But for the other arm, which is the program, and I link back to what Dr. Ashwin said in the beginning, we are still encountering vaccine complacency or hesitancy of sorts. Just to give you one piece of data, and Dr. Sareen very rightly spoke about frontline workers and health workers. As of yesterday, which is the 321st day after the program started, yesterday nearly 9,000 healthcare workers took their second dose. And that was at a time when the schedule was an interval of 4 weeks. And yesterday, about 17,000 frontline workers actually took their second dose. Now, that's the kind of hesitancy or complacency one can see even among those who know they are most at risk. Therefore,
that's quite shocking. That's quite shocking. What explains that, Dr. Dasgupta?
Well, what explains that is varied perceptions of risk, a range of doubts that people genuinely have. Let us not all conflate this with anti-vaxxers, which is actually often a minuscule part. One has to reckon with a very wide range of doubts and perceptions and hesitations and so on, and therefore a far greater degree of engagement in communication terms than probably we are doing now.
Okay, Dr. Sareen, I want to take that question to you, because there is a section and there is an opinion that has been expressed that perhaps the huge gap between vaccines that we have in place at the moment, perhaps there's a need to close that gap, because that would in fact perhaps motivate more and more people to take both the jabs in one go. That's a view that has been expressed. Do you share that perception?
Well, it depends on the type of vaccine that you have used. Like in Sputnik, it's 3 weeks. In others, it is 4. But in Covishield, the data from UK and others have said it is 12 weeks is a good enough period. Like for hepatitis B, we use 6 months gap. First shot, and then you wait maybe for 6 months or so. So there is no harm, I think, in the gap, as earlier studies have shown with the vaccine, but certainly there is a need for a booster that we should see if it is possible. The two other things we should realize is that tweaking a vaccine is easy for mRNA. You can add something or the other, and you need a pan-COVID vaccine because new variants will come every day, and FDA or maybe our DCGI should allow vaccines which have primarily the same core and then add on some tweaking for people, because if you go for trials, you're gone for months together. Therefore, we have to accept the current vaccines are the ones which will stay with us. We get all the 2 dosages, and those where we can afford the 3rd dose should be given. Making new vaccines is not easy. One more thing is in the testing part, the new variant, the Omicron, has several parts which are missing from it. So your routine PCR will certainly pick up, but if somebody is coming with a COVID-like illness, don't forget it. It looks like COVID but doesn't test positive. Wait for a few days, repeat the test, maybe with multiple tests, but don't let the patient go because he can be a spreader of a new mutant. So this must be remembered. And if there is a illness, please don't hide it. Please come out and tell that, yes, there is a flu-like illness or new symptoms like body ache and others. So we all are to be on high alert to prevent development of new mutants and spread of new mutants. Where will the thief go? Where there is no police. If you have no vaccinated guy, the virus will go there and multiply. But if we have vaccinated population, we will survive.
Right. One last question from Dr. Seth. Dr. Seth, if there are vaccine updations that take place in the next few months, those who are not in the category of immunocompromised or healthcare workers or senior citizens, would you advise them to wait for the updated vaccine if at all a possibility of a booster opens up in the next few weeks?
I would not suggest that. And we're going to actually trust the government on its policies very clearly. And it's going to take some time. Yes, it may take 3 months for more sort of overarching second dose vaccines. But clearly, at the moment, safety is a real issue. And if the government decided that everybody does need a booster, we would then go for the booster as is available at that particular time and not wait on and on and on for a second generation vaccine to come to us. May I just say one more thing, which I think my good friend Dr. Sareen, and I would expand on what he said. Of course, he's saying something very cautiously, but let me just say this very important aspect about the dosing of the vaccine. You will recall that the Covishield dosing of 3 months came in because of the fine balance of science and availability, where availability for first dosing was needed at that time, and therefore 3 months had shown to be efficacious. Now the equations are shifting to first dosing being given to 85%, and clearly vaccine second dose hesitancy coming in because of the gap of 3 months. World knows that 2 months is as good as 3 months, and the world is the standard of care, is a shorter dosing, and that is why I suggest that we need to go to shorter dosing without mincing any words, and I think the government should consider it if we want to second vaccine, do the double dosing as fast as possible. There is no point creating more vaccine hesitancy for second dosing as is being seen.
All right. On that note, I'd like to thank all our doctors for joining us for those very, very valuable insights, even as the debates over the booster shots, the spread of Omicron amongst children, as well as the requirement of the reduction of the gap between doses is concerned. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, Dr. Seth, Dr. Sunila Garg, Professor Dr. S.K. Sareen, and Dr. Rajiv Dasgupta. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us these very, very important insights. On Wednesday, terrorists attacked traffic cop Muhammad Abdullah for serving Bharat.